the spring of 1943, the world held its breath. The Allied forces had successfully swept across the deserts of North Africa, but now they stood at the edge of the vast Mediterranean, looking north toward the jagged coastline of Europe. Everyone from the highest generals in London to the paranoid mind of Adolf Hitler knew exactly where the hammer would fall next. Sicily was the stepping stone, the soft underbelly of the continent. If the Allies took the island, they could puncture the heart of the Nazi regime. But Hitler had fortified the island until it bristled with steel and lead. A direct assault meant a massacre that would stain the beaches red and stall the liberation for years. The stakes were nothing less than the future of Western civilization, and the odds were stacked heavily against the invaders. Were in the smoke-filled rooms of British naval intelligence. Two men were tasked with achieving the impossible, making the Germans believe the obvious target was a diversion. Ewan Montague, a brilliant lawyer turned naval officer, and Charles Cholmondeley, an eccentric flight lieutenant with a wild imagination, were the architects of this grand deception. They were not seeking medals or personal glory. Their motivation was purely the survival of the thousands of Allied soldiers who would soon be charging into the surf. They knew that if they could move just a few German divisions away from Sicily, they could change the course of history. But how do you trick a regime built on surveillance and paranoia? The inspiration for their plan came from a strange document known as the Trout Memo, and it utilized a vivid analogy of fly fishing. To catch a wary trout, one must present a lure that looks so authentic, so natural, that the fish ignores its survival instincts and strikes. In this high-stakes game, the Nazi high command was the trout, and the British needed the perfect bait. The idea was as macabre as it was ingenious to plant false invasion plans on a dead body and let the ocean currents deliver it directly into the hands of the enemy. However, finding the right bait proved to be a dark and difficult necessity. They needed a corpse that would satisfy a forensic pathologist. It had to look like a victim of a plane crash at sea, someone who had floated in the water for days before washing ashore. After weeks of searching morgues, they found Glyndwr Michael. He was a tragic, lonely figure, a homeless man from Wales who had died in a warehouse after consuming rat poison. He had no family to claim him, no legacy to leave behind, and a life defined by hardship. In a twist of fate that he could never have imagined, this forgotten man was destined to become the most important soldier of the entire war. Montague and Cholmondeley began the meticulous process of creating a soul for their dead hero. They gave him a name, Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. They did not just forge papers. They built a human life from scratch. They decided he was a bit of a spendthrift, someone who lived beyond his means. So they tucked a stern letter from his bank about an overdraft into his pockets. They gave him a stern father, keys to a London flat, and even a bill for a new shirt. To make him truly real, they gave him a heart. They created a fiancée named Pam, using a photograph of a beautiful clerk from the intelligence office. They composed heartbreaking love letters from her, filled with the longing and anxiety of a woman waiting for her soldier. These personal touches were designed to bypass suspicion and appeal to humanity. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Yet a heavy silence hung over the team. They realized that if a single detail was slightly off, the Gestapo would realize the trick and execute every single agent involved. The The hook was finally set, and the fate of the war now rested on the cold shoulders of a man who never was, waiting for the tide. The reality of the deception was a logistical nightmare that defied common military practice. To maintain the illusion that Major Martin had perished in a recent plane crash, the body of Glyndwr Michael had to be preserved in a state of suspended decay. Montague and Cholmondeley secured a specialized, airtight steel canister packed with dry ice to slow the inevitable march of time. This grim cargo was driven under the cover of darkness to the Holy Loch, where the HMS Seraph awaited. The crew believed the canister contained a weather station, a necessary lie. Commander Bill Jewell was one of the few who knew the truth, yet even he felt the weight of the macabre passenger resting in the cold shadows of his vessel. The Seraph began a perilous journey through the Bay of Biscay, navigating waters infested with U-boats and patrolled by the Luftwaffe. The destination was the coast of Huelva, Spain. While Spain was officially neutral, it was a hornet's nest of German espionage. Huelva was chosen because it was the domain of Adolf Klaus, an aggressive Nazi agent. Montague knew that if a body carrying secret documents washed up there, it would be meticulously picked over by the Abwehr. In the early hours of April 30th, the submarine surfaced a mile off the Spanish shore. Under a moonless sky, Jewell and his officers brought the canister to the casing. They removed the body, now dressed in a Royal Marine uniform and a Mae West life jacket. With a final silent salute, they pushed Major Martin into the dark Atlantic currents, praying the tide would do its duty. His body now carried the future of Europe. The following morning, a Spanish fisherman named José Antonio Rey Maria spotted a dark shape bobbing in the swells. What he hauled aboard was not a catch of fish, but the cold remains of a British officer, a black briefcase still chained to his wrist. As the body reached Spanish authorities, a choreographed performance began to turn in London. Montague's team started sending urgent, top-secret cables to the British naval attaché in Madrid, Commander Alan Hilgarth. These messages, which the British knew were being intercepted, expressed frantic concern over a lost briefcase containing sensitive documents. The more London demanded the briefcase's return, the more irresistible the bait became. The greatest danger lay in the morgue. A Spanish doctor, Eduardo del Torno, was tasked with performing the autopsy. If he looked too closely, he might notice the lack of water in the lungs, or worse, traces of the rat poison that killed Glyndwr Michael. However, at the oppressive heat of the Spanish morning and the advanced state of decomposition worked in favor of the Allies. The doctor, hurried and perhaps sympathetic to the unfortunate pilot, concluded the cause of death was drowning following an aircraft accident. Meanwhile, the briefcase had found its way into the hands of Spanish naval officers willing to cooperate with their German friends. German agents successfully managed to gain access to the papers, using a thin needle to roll up the letters without breaking the wax seals. They carefully photographed every page of the fake invasion plans. The photographs were rushed to Berlin, landing on the desks of the Fremde Heere West, the department responsible for analyzing enemy forces. The documents proved to be a masterpiece of misdirection. They spoke of invasions in Greece and Sardinia, and while dismissing Sicily as a mere feint. The intelligence officers scrutinized the personal letters, the bank statements, and the photograph of Pam. To them, the soul Montague had built felt undeniably real. The bait was not just swallowed. It was being digested as truth. Now the ultimate question remained. The reports were being prepared for the highest level of the Third Reich. Would the most paranoid man in Europe, Adolf Hitler, ignore his general's instincts and bet the fate of the Mediterranean on the contents of a dead man's pockets? The game of shadows had reached its most critical juncture. The intelligence reports from Huelva ascended to the highest echelon of the Third Reich, landing directly on the desk of the Führer at the Wolf's Lair. Adolf Hitler, a man notoriously prone to paranoid suspicions, he found himself captivated by the mundane details of Major William Martin's life. While some generals remained cautious, Hitler's strategic preoccupation with the Balkans played perfectly into the hands of Montagu and Cholmondeley. The forged letters, the photograph of Pam, and the bank notices created a facade of reality more convincing than any military logic. To the Nazi leader, these were not just papers. They were an intimate window into the soul of a British officer. He was convinced. The Allied invasion was coming for Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. Acting on this conviction, the German High Command issued orders that shifted the tide of the Mediterranean theater. Massive movements of troops and machinery began across the continent. Panzer divisions, desperately needed on the Eastern Front, and were instead loaded onto trains and sent south toward the rugged mountains of Greece. Mines were laid in Greek harbors, and elite paratrooper units were repositioned to defend the beaches of Sardinia. Sicily, the actual stepping stone to Italy, was left dangerously underdefended, its garrisons stripped of their most potent reinforcements. The entire Nazi defensive strategy for southern Europe was now based entirely on the contents of a dead man's pockets. On July 10th, 1943, Operation Husky began. As thousands of Allied soldiers climbed into landing craft under the gray light of dawn, they braced for a slaughter. They expected the beaches of Sicily to be a wall of iron and fire. Instead, as the ramps dropped and the men stormed ashore, the resistance they encountered was disorganized and surprisingly thin, and the predicted bloodbath never materialized. While the fighting was still fierce, the absence of the heavy panzer divisions made a decisive difference. The deception had effectively stripped the fortress Europe of its teeth, allowing the Allies to gain a foothold that would eventually lead to the liberation of Italy. Back in London, Ewan Montagu and Charles Cholmondeley waited in a state of agonizing suspense until a top-secret decrypt reached their office. It was a German communication confirming that Hitler was still sending reinforcements to Greece, even as the Allies were already landing in Sicily. The bait had been fully digested. A short, triumphant telegram was immediately dispatched to Winston Churchill, mincemeat swallowed whole. The two architects of the plan could finally breathe. Their gamble, born from a fisherman's analogy and a tragic death, had paid off beyond their wildest imaginations. The true weight of this victory lay in the silent sacrifice of a man who never knew he was a soldier. Glyndwr Michael had died unloved and unnoticed in a cold London warehouse, a victim of poverty and despair. Yet in his second life as Major William Martin, he had achieved more than most generals. It is estimated that his presence on that Spanish beach saved at least 30,000 Allied lives. A man who was once a nobody had effectively changed the map of the world. He was buried with full military honors in Spain, his headstone bearing the name of the fictional Major Martin. For decades, the grave in Huelva remained a site of quiet mystery, each visited by curious travelers and historians who knew only the legend of the man who never was. It was a silent testament to a secret that helped break the back of the Axis powers. It wasn't until 1996 that the British government finally added a small but profound inscription to the base of the headstone, revealing the true identity of the man resting beneath the Spanish soil. Glyndwr Michael finally received his name back, merging the myth with the man. His story stands as a haunting reminder of the moral complexities of war. In the grand theater of conflict, the most powerful weapon was not a bomb or a bullet, but the redirected life of a man who, in death, found a purpose the world had denied him in life. The man who never was had become the man who saved the world.